When you actually mount the intake, you have a lower bolt here that's right behind this water line hose. It's a big bolt. You have a big bolt here that's in the block between these two hoses against the block, and up top you have a stud sticking out with a nut on it. And I showed Zach and I showed Tim where they go. There's where the bottom bolt goes, that bottom bolt. There's where the top bolt goes, which is there's where the top nut goes. That sits on this stud up here with this nut on it. And this hole here between the two breather hoses is this bolt here on the block between those two there. That's that deal. As you put this on, there's a trick to it. There's an elbow here with a hose connection. Here against the block is a black hose with like an offset to it, and it's just hanging up here. There's the open stub end. That there hose end plugs into this fitting right here. Plugs into this fitting. That's where that hose goes. And of course, when you set it on, this bottom goes into this bottom little hose. These two big breather line intake air breathers go into these two. And this top hose goes here on the top, but it can be put on last. And it's up here. And the hose clamp's already on here for it. And on this lower elbow hose, the hose clamp's already right here for that. There are some spare hose clamps over there on the table in case these are too small or you break one or have a problem. There's some spares and there's some bigger ones. And at the very end, let's see. Oh, cancel that statement. Okay, so you got that. The other thing to know is there are two electrical plugs up here. One is right up here. It is a 2-prong sitting right here close to that water hose and sitting right above that ground cable. It's just sitting on that ground cable right there right now. It's a 2-prong. And out here on the intake valve, on the valve cover, is a 3-prong plug right there. Right there. That's 3-prong. Now we're going to go to the other side here. Here near the top of the assembly, there's the 2-prong with the gray thing, gray rubber around it. That's the 2-prong that plugs in up there at that 2-prong plug I just showed you, which is over there. Over there by that ground wire. And the green one, this one here near the top, that's the top right there, has a 3-prong, and that 3-prong goes into this plug on the valve cover. Okay. That gizmo we referred to earlier, that sensor with the gray vacuum line that'll be hooked up and hanging there after this intake is on, down here there's a plastic loop. I'm back up here. There's the top. This plastic loop is near the top. It has a little ridge, and that sensor sits in there. You have to weasel that vacuum line down through here, and that sensor sits in here, and this has a snap lock. There, you can see it. There's the snap lock. This little edge sits in a ridge that's cut into that sensor to hold it in place. And then right here near it is a purple plug, round 3-prong, plugs into that sensor like so. Like so. Right up here is where that plugged in. And then this big wire harness, after everything's in place, snaps into these 1, 2, 3 wiring harness snaps to hold that wiring harness, which is this wiring harness, in place. Also, here are 3 ground terminals. Here's one. It's just a silver loop with a couple wires in it near the top. Then here in the middle is a second one. Here at the bottom is a third one. They get grounded to 3 screws. And if you look at the valve cover, I'm on the back side, left side, pointing towards the front. These screws sit beside the valve cover. They're right there. There's 1, and you go up to about the middle. There's 2, and you go up to almost the top. There's 3. So those 3 little bolts go to hold these 3 ground wires in place. After this is all assembled and in place, this black exhaust or breather, whatever unit it is, has a hole in the center, has 2 bolts. The 2 bolts that goes on the rear of the engine, there's the hose that it plugs into, and then those 2 bolts go right there and right there. This black wire goes down underneath here, underneath the hose and stuff, so it should already be underneath here when you put the intake on. So that's that. Also, on the what I'm going to call I'm calling it the passenger side of the boat, where the starter is, the big starter wire is disconnected and covered with electrical tape. Take the tape off, obviously, and it hooks to that big stud on the starter. Right now, the starter solenoid will click. I have that wired in, but the starter won't crank until this big wire is on it. So that's that part. And I'll get the other thing to know is every bolt sitting over here on the table next to these clamps is the Loctite. Every bolt gets Loctite on it. And Zach's used Loctite before, so if you end up doing it, he'll know how much to use. You don't use a whole lot. You don't use too little. Usually a small drop will do you. But all the bolts should be Loctited. And I'll get the torque specs for those bolts too and how they torque. But the big thing to know is when you hang this unit, those 3 big bolts that I showed you a while back are used to support it. Now don't forget to put your rubber rings in these 6 grooves. The parts that are on back order go in these 6 grooves. And then these big bolts temporarily hold this beast into place, and you don't want to torque them tight. You only want to have them snug so you can wiggle this a little to get these little bolts here to line up. The bolts at the actual intake O-ring, rubber O-rings locations. So what you would do then is those bolts for the rubber O-rings, there's 7, and here they are on the table. They're sitting here to the right, just to the right of the spark plugs, and there's 7 of them there. To the left of the spark plugs is a bunch of bolts that have a little collar on them at the top, and those bolts all go to the side covers that go down here. There's a cover for each side, and over here's one cover right there on the floor, and over there by that umbrella next to that pile of coolers is the other cover. So that's important to know. And then of course, after you're all done, depending on what you find out from Halls about how to do it as far as starting it goes first time, I'm not sure if you'll want to put these spark plug things in the spark plugs yet or not. That I'm not sure of. Tim's going to find that out from Halls. And after this is on, here at the back is a little round elbow, steel-like or aluminum tube, might be steel, I don't know. And I'll show you what happens there. I'm going back to the other side. That little steel tube elbow, after this is on and in place, that's your fuel line. And here, there's the fuel filter. There, and the line comes right out of the fuel filter. It's a quick release. This quick release plug plugs onto that fuel line assembly right there, that fuel line. So that's that deal. Very important. Don't forget to put the oil in before you connect the starter wire. Very important. You don't want to forget that. Okay, here in the middle of this intake is a plug with 3 prongs. It's yellow inside. That plug goes to this wire that's hanging here on the side, hanging out, comes out beside that fuel line, and this has 3 prongs inside, and it's got this plastic wrap thing around it, safety wrap thing on it, and that's where that goes. That gets plugged in to there. I made a note here and left it right here. Do not start until oil is in engine. I also hung a cardboard note up over top the starter buttons. You can't maybe see it from here, but it's there. Do not start till oil is in engine. This piece I'm going to show you first. I'm going to show you how it all goes together, but the thing to know about this piece is this piece gets put on last after the intake is on, because this sensor goes into a ridge it's on the head, on the intake over there, and then you have to take this gray hose, it's a vacuum line, and weasel it down through everything there to make it come down here to where it's going to connect to this T. But I'm showing you how it all connects early on, but you don't do that connection till the very end. I wanted to make a change there and let you know that till the very end. So it just lays here for now. And the thing to know is when you're weaseling this line down through the stuff on that intake to get it to where it needs to go, do not lose that little black plastic collar. That's why I have a piece of tape on there. You do not want to lose that collar. And this gray vacuum line that's on this sensor assembly, okay, goes right there on this side of the T, right there. You push the gray line in there, put that tensioner in. and I'm showing you a real close up. You can look at the other little lock collar on the left side of the T, and you can see how it seats. So that's how that goes. And then after that gray line is on here, you take this T assembly, and down inside, behind this back lower hose, is a little gray stub right there sticking out. It's only about an inch long, and this T has to go down and be put on that stub. Before you put that T on that stub down there, you have to take this little collar out of this piece of yellow duct tape laying on the table. That's one little black collar, and you slide it onto that stub. Then you push this T onto that stub, and then you slide the collar down and lock it tight.